She emerged from the woods as if an apparition, her gait unsteady, her body quivering, her coat saturated, and her gaze filled with terror. Clutched in her jaws was a minuscule, expiring puppy, its breath shallow. No sound escaped her, no yelp, no snarl. She simply remained motionless in the descending snowflakes, gazing at the cabin's entrance as though aware of its occupant and his profound loss. The events that followed would alter the course of things entirely. Existence was preserved, hidden truths were revealed, and an indissoluble connection was formed between a shattered individual and two forsaken beings. This is more than a tale of rescue, it's an account of their role in his salvation. For weeks, Eli Brennan had ignored his telephone. It wasn't due to a lack of calls, but rather because no one remained for whom he felt compelled to respond. His rustic log dwelling, nestled far within the Montana forests, felt less like a residence and more like a tomb. The quietude within was not serene, it was agonizing. Days stretched into evenings devoid of any human utterance, any motivation to engage. This persisted until the dawn. She materialized, a figure struggling through the snow, uncollared, silent, conveying only suffering and an additional element, resolve. His initial sighting of her occurred when he slightly opened the door to assess the conditions outside. Initially, she seemed like a dark silhouette against the snowy backdrop. A German shepherd, her limbs quaking, her flanks rising and falling with effort. Then he noticed the small package she carried. A puppy stained with blood, its hold on life tenuous. Her gaze met his, a noiseless cry not of terror, but of entreaty. Eli remained still, movement was impossible for him. That look penetrated a part of him he had closed off years before. He had grown unaccustomed to making choices, especially significant ones. Yet, there was an undeniable quality about her. She offered no supplication, no soft cries. She just stood, clutching her young as if laying her final hope before him, as if her quest had been solely for him. Unconsciously, Eli moved closer. His hands acted purely on instinct. The former paramedic within him, dormant beneath layers of sorrow, still stirred. He received the puppy into his embrace. It was warm, yet its life force was waning. She relinquished her hold without resistance, as if certain of his trustworthiness. That act of faith broke through a barrier within Eli, reviving something he believed had perished. The shepherd made no attempt to enter. She remained seated at the doorway, snowflakes accumulating on her coat, her gaze locked on the entrance like a vigilant sentinel. Consequently, Eli performed an action he hadn't undertaken in a significant while. He permitted them entry, both mother and pup, for motives he couldn't yet comprehend but sensed profoundly within his being. Within, the dwelling was poorly lit, its sole warmth emanating from a hearth that had not burned brightly for days. Eli made room on his kitchen surface and carefully placed the puppy upon it. The tiny form was motionless. Each respiration was uncertain, each moment ticked away. Eli's hands quivered, not from the chill, but from the recollection of a different surface, a different instance when he had strived to rescue another, one he had been unable to revive. The German shepherd, drenched and shivering, observed his every action. She emitted no sound, no whimper, merely watched, her ears erect, her muscles tense. This was not hostility, it was a fragile hope. A mother unwilling to surrender. And, for the first occasion in many years, Eli recognized he too was unwilling to surrender. Externally, the snowfall intensified. The woodland absorbed all noise. Yet, within that small shelter, a spark ignited. A delicate connection between human and animal, bound not by coincidence but by a more profound force, sorrow, intuition, perhaps destiny itself. As the flames behind them strengthened, illuminating the timbered interior, Eli murmured involuntarily, "I have you now." He was unsure if his words were for the puppy or for his own benefit. The moment Eli placed the minuscule puppy on the kitchen surface, time seemed to distort. The blizzard raging externally intensified, as though the cosmos sensed this would not be a typical tranquil night in a remote location. The dwelling, previously a sanctuary of quiet, transformed into an arena where life and death contended. He retrieved a worn medical kit from under the basin, his hands reflexively seeking out the items he had not used for a long time. Dressings, disinfectant, forceps. He had not tended to anyone's injuries since retiring from his profession. However, that familiar cadence, submerged under strata of sorrow, began to re-emerge through his touch. The puppy's respirations were faint, strained, and infrequent. Its form was frigid, quaking uncontrollably even with the increasing warmth from the nearby hearth. Eli enveloped the delicate being in a substantial towel, tenderly rubbing warmth into its torso, murmuring soft, incoherent phrases such as, "Remain with me, little one," And not while I'm here. The mother, still saturated from the snowfall, kept her gaze fixed on him. She remained motionless, not even flickering her eyelids, simply watching steadfast, as though her entire life force now resided within her offspring. Subsequently, as if signaled, the cabin's illumination wavered and then extinguished. Obscurity enveloped the space. Eli swore softly. He had not operated the generator for many weeks, and the blizzard outdoors would have already obstructed the secondary fuel conduits. The fireplace now represented their sole supply of warmth, illumination, and optimism. He moved the puppy nearer to the fireplace, its radiance casting shades of amber and urgency upon them both. The quietness within the chamber was more pronounced than the gale outside, and it was then that the realization struck him. This instant, this throb of apprehension from striving to preserve a life against overwhelming obstacles. It was familiar. He had experienced this previously. Not this precise scenario, but an event that had indelibly etched itself upon his heart. A snow-covered thoroughfare, an inverted vehicle, cries, and the scent of fuel. His daughter's small hand escaping his grasp. The emergency signals wailing, arriving too late. That marked the day Eli ceased to be a rescuer. That marked the day he resolved that no one would depend on him ever again. Yet, this evening circumstances were altered. He was not attempting to redeem humanity, merely a single, tiny pulse of life, a single being with an abundance of experiences yet to come. He looked towards the mother once more. Her gaze was weary yet resolute, seemingly conveying, "I have exhausted my efforts. The responsibility is now yours." He liquefied snow in a container above the flames to fashion a heated poultice, applying it softly to the puppy's torso to stimulate blood flow. Every respiration the puppy managed was a moment of suspense, an unknown. He remained awake throughout the night, combating his own exhaustion as a warrior battles slumber. Periodically, the puppy would stir, expectorate, or whimper, each utterance a minor triumph, each quiet spell a renewed surge of apprehension. However, the most poignant aspect was not the puppy's state. It was the unwavering presence of the mother. She guarded her young like a spectral warrior, unyielding even in the face of mortality. Eli perceived something within her, a devotion so complete it rendered his own anguish somewhat bearable. Not eradicated, but perhaps, just perhaps, he no longer needed to shoulder it in solitude. When daylight approached the skyline, the fire crackled rhythmically beside them, like a pulse. The puppy moved once more, this time emitting a soft cry, almost inaudible, yet signifying life. Eli exhaled unsteadily and murmured, "Well done, little one." And it's possible, just possible, he was also addressing himself. By the middle of the morning, the tempest had abated, yet the cold continued to permeate every crevice of the cabin. Eli remained awake. He was seated, stooped near the hearth, his gaze intent on the small form nestled in a covering. Scout, he had begun to name him. The designation arose spontaneously, like a murmur from an unknown source. The puppy remained feeble, though the most critical period appeared to have passed for the time being. And the mother, she eventually slumbered adjacent to the entrance, one eye perpetually ajar, a mixture of vigilance and supplication. Eli observed her intently. "Luna," he voiced quietly. "You resemble a Luna." She twitched her ear as a reply. There was something in her head tilt. It seemed as though she comprehended not merely the term, but the significance of being identified, of being acknowledged. Yet, even as tranquility descended, Eli could not dispel the disquiet lingering at the periphery of his thoughts. Luna repeatedly peered out the iced-over pane, invariably in the direction of the woods. Not without pattern, she wasn't fretful. She was observing, anticipating, as if the entity she had fled had not yet concluded its pursuit. Therefore, Eli dressed warmly in multiple garments, pulled on his aged footwear, and pursued her line of sight into the woodland. The snow was shin-deep, audibly compressing with each footfall as he ventured beyond the forest edge. The quietude was dense, not serene, but rather like a bated breath, a sort of stillness that felt observed, not vacant. Trees loomed like ancient sentinels, shadows stretched behind their boles. Merely 20 yards from the dwelling, he discerned them, prints not solely canine, but human as well. Initially dispersed, then showing signs of alarm, and finally stained with blood. His respiration hitched. He traced the impressions until they vanished into a slight depression near an ancient, frozen waterway. There, partially concealed by snow, were the vestiges of a temporary settlement, a ripped tarpaulin, flattened containers, and something more sinister, a piece of fabric saturated with desiccated blood entwined around a segment of nylon cord. Close by, a metallic marker was partly embedded in the ice. He stooped to retrieve it and examined its reverse side. 3 initials were engraved on the metal, JKC. These characters held no significance for him at that moment, yet they caused a visceral unease. Eli surveyed the forest edge, abruptly conscious of his vulnerability. That sensation, absent since his time as a paramedic, the awareness of being observed, seized him like the bite of extreme cold. He refrained from fleeing, but his pace quickened on his return. Each footfall felt weightier, each backward look more common. Upon reaching the cabin, Luna was expectant. She moved restlessly near the entrance, her tail rigid, her stance vigilant. Scout emitted a gentle whimper, a weak vocalization barely louder than a murmur. Eli secured the door after him, bolted it, and rested against it, taking a deep inhalation. That evening, Luna, for the initial occasion, leaned her form against Eli's limb, a quiet expression of gratitude or perhaps a mute entreaty to avoid venturing outside again. Eli remained silent. He simply extended his arm and placed his hand upon her head. It was the first contact he'd had with another living being in many months, possibly even more. The fire sputtered once more, and as it did, Eli rotated the tag repeatedly in his grasp, murmuring to himself, "From what place did you originate, Luna?" Yet he was already aware they had not merely strayed to this location. They had fled from something that might still be lurking. The gale resurfaced as if intent on retribution. By the subsequent evening, the blizzard that appeared to have subsided had returned with renewed ferocity, the type of Montana snow event that engulfs noise, extinguishes illumination, and causes trees to groan like ancient skeletons. Eli positioned himself at the casement, the pane obscured by condensation from the hearth behind him, observing the snowflakes intensify like descending cinders. It was peculiar how something so noiseless could bear such immense gravity. However, this evening was not solely concerned with atmospheric conditions, it was concerned with recollection. Within, Scout cried gently in his blanketed alcove. Luna was coiled snugly near him, her ears twitching at each sound from the structure's framework. The dwelling, despite its modest size, seemed vast in the gloom. Each silhouette appeared more elongated, each creak more pronounced. Yet it was the quietness that ultimately broke Eli, not the external silence, but the internal one. Tempests invariably dredged up bygone times, and this particular one possessed an extensive reach. He had not confided in anyone, not truly even in himself, that this period of the year was the most difficult. Not due to festive seasons or solitude, but because it was the anniversary of their passing, his spouse, Miriam, and his daughter, Ellie. A single instance of treacherous ice, one vehicle approaching too rapidly, a few crucial moments too many. He had been at the wheel, he had been yelling. And yet he could not prevent it, could not amend it. He recalled the mangled debris as if it remained before his eyes, metal contorted like parchment, vapor ascending from the motor, the odor of scorched tires and gore. And Ellie, her small hand extending towards him as consciousness faded. That evening shattered him, not merely in sentiment, but in spirit. For years, he had roamed the remnants of that instant, seeking a target for culpability, invariably returning to his own reflection. This was his reason for retreating here, to vanish without perishing, to entomb himself before the ground claimed him. Yet now Luna and Scout were present. And in their respirations, delicate though they were, he had discovered something unforeseen, a cause for concern, a motive to remain conscious. He approached the hearth, adding another piece of wood. Flames surged in reply. Electricity had long been absent, and the generator's iced-up fuel conduit would not permit a restart before dawn. He examined Scout, laying a soft hand on the puppy's side, still heated, still respiring. Luna moved nearer, placing her jaw on Eli's lap. He remained still, simply permitting her to be there. The touch was stimulating, steadying, as if perhaps they were mutually preventing each other's collapse. Then the sound occurred, a scrape, then another, at the pane. Not the breeze, not a branch, something intentional, something attempting entry. Eli rose gradually, Luna also stood, ears erect, form rigid. He seized the torch from the worktop, his pulse hammering like a battle drum within him. He crept towards the casement, but when the light struck the glass, nothing was there, no person, no gaze, only marks, canine and human footprints intermingled, blurred in the snow like a troublesome recollection attempting to alter its narrative. The tempest now raged more fiercely, as if deriding him. Yet Eli did not waver. Not on this occasion. He secured the casements, drew the drapes, and resettled himself between the canine and the young one, the hearth's glow dancing over his features. He murmured, "Not this evening. For this is the reality, some tempests are external, but the most severe ones reside within us. And when an individual elects to confront them, not merely endure them, that is when recuperation commences." However, this particular storm was far from concluded. Something, or someone, remained at large. Dawn arrived with a silent strain, the sort that blankets all things like a caution veiled in tranquility. The snowfall had diminished, yet the coldness lingered more intensely than previously. Eli was seated near Scout. The puppy continued to slumber, though less flaccidly than the prior day. Hugh had returned to his gums, a quiver in his minuscule paws, a bit more force in his breathing, advancement. But recuperation, Eli understood all too clearly, does not invariably equate to security. At times, it is merely the calm at the tempest's center. While Eli bent to re-examine the puppy's temperature, an item attracted his attention. Underneath the coat, on Scout's flank, directly below the ribcage, an area of skin appeared discolored and uneven. He carefully separated the fur and sensed his heart rate accelerate. It was not merely a contusion, it was a burn, round, with distinct edges as if seared by a brand. A wave of nausea overcame him. This was no mishap, an individual had inflicted this. An individual had possessed this puppy. The notion struck him like a dousing of frigid water. Scout and Luna had not simply roamed the forest and chanced upon the nearest welcoming shelter. They were fleeing something, someone. He rose and proceeded directly to the compact storage unit in the angle of the room, retrieving his antiquated satellite device. His sole genuine link to the external world, particularly when terrestrial phone lines were inoperative. He activated the seldom used, dust-covered portable computer he reserved primarily for critical situations, his digits moving swiftly over the keyboard as ingrained habit guided him. He investigated any information pertaining to cruelty to animals, illicit breeding enterprises, or instances of canine branding. Following an hour of searching, a connection was made. A situation in Idaho from the previous year came to light. A breeding facility, subjected to a raid and closure after undisclosed informants directed law enforcement to a mountain dwelling. The visuals were unsettling. Enclosures piled like cargo containers, young dogs confined in mesh cages, some lacking appendages or sight. The pictures troubled Eli deeply. However, it was not the narrative that made him pause, but a tag visible in one of the law enforcement photographs. Faintly discernible on the neckband of one of the liberated canines were those identical initials, JKC. Eli delved into his coat's compartment and extracted the frosted tag he had discovered in the woodland. Identical? It must be. His pulse resounded in his ears. This was no mere chance occurrence. Luna was not simply a missing wanderer. She had fled an infernal place and, by some instinct, managed to locate the solitary individual in a remote area who understood how to contend for life once more. Abruptly, the wireless receiver emitted static from the other side of the chamber. It was not powered on. Eli approached it and activated the power. A weak emergency channel broadcasted local park ranger communications. A dubious vehicle observed near the northern woodland boundary. A dark-colored van, lacking license plates, proceeding southward, potentially conveying animals. A chill went through Eli. They were searching for her. And perhaps they were not merely traversing the area. Perhaps they were aware. Perhaps they were returning. He looked at Luna, who was once more gazing at the entrance. At that moment, he reached a resolve. No further concealment, no further withdrawal. Not for them, not ever again. He searched through the storage space, pulling out aged boards, fasteners, any materials he could utilize to obstruct the casements and reinforce the outbuilding. Each motion was swift, accurate, and filled with an intensity Eli had not experienced in many years. Not since the loss of his kin, not since he abandoned efforts to rescue anyone. But now he had beings to safeguard, too, in reality. As the sun descended once more, projecting an unsettling illumination upon the snowbanks outside, Eli stood in the cabin's core, tool in hand, his chest constricted, and his spirit alert for the first occasion in a long time. For he now understood this was not simply a salvation. It was a struggle. The breeze had subsided into that disquieting calm once more, the type that causes a prickling sensation on the skin, not from the chill, but from the absence of expected sound. The snowflakes currently drifted languidly, fine and misleading, as though the tempest had momentarily halted to permit a more sinister element to traverse. Eli was seated in the kitchen area, his implements scattered about from the task of fortifying the dwelling. Casements secured, entrances doubly bolted, every structural sound investigated repeatedly. Luna had maintained her position near the main entrance throughout the afternoon. Scout, while still feeble, had started to move more frequently, occasionally emitting a faint vocalization that hardly carried beyond his own hearing. Eli had only just begun to relax his vigilance when the event occurred. A rap on the door. Not forceful, not hostile, merely a solitary, composed tapping, as if someone were assessing the timber. His physique became rigid at once. Luna rose, her ears flickered, and a subdued snarl resonated from deep within her. Not a light-hearted sound, but one originating from profound, ingrained recollection. Eli approached the entrance deliberately. He neither unlatched it nor uttered a word. He looked through the viewing aperture he had installed himself years prior, for no particular purpose until this moment. Externally stood an individual, perhaps in his mid-40s, with a smoothly shaven face clad in a substantial green jacket bearing an embroidered insignia on the breast, wildlife control, authoritative, neat. Incorrect. An element about him seemed artificial, like a character in a film, not an individual suited to these forests. "Good evening," the man announced informally, his tone overly suave for someone navigating a blizzard. "Apologies for the interruption. We've received information about a missing animal, considered she might have come this way. A German shepherd, mature female, accompanied by a young one. Have you observed anything?" Each utterance from the man caused Eli a sense of revulsion. His manner of referring to the animal as if it were expendable, his gaze flicking towards the casements as though surveying the premises. But primarily it was his precise knowledge of what to inquire about, down to the specific breed and the presence of a puppy. That was not coincidental, it was targeted, it was deliberate. Eli retreated slightly, responding through the closed entrance. "No animals are present here. Only myself." A silence. "Would you object if I briefly surveyed the area?" "Actually, I would." Another silence, more prolonged this time. "As you wish," the man stated, and then grinned. Eli could discern it in his tone, a grin devoid of geniality. "Remain secure out in these parts. It can become quite isolated." Following this, he departed, posing no further inquiries, offering no objection, simply vanishing beyond the forest edge like mist dissolving into the trees. Yet Eli was not deceived. That sort of quietude did not depart, it persisted. He did not ease his vigilance, not in the slightest. He remained immobile, his exhalations clouding the pain, his gaze tracing the path the man had taken until it disappeared as though it had never existed. Some time elapsed, then a full hour, and just when he began to consider the possibility that the man had departed, Luna emitted a sudden yelp and dashed to the rear of the dwelling. Scout whimpered faintly from his resting place. Eli pursued Luna's snarl to the rear casement. He required no torch, the lunar illumination was sufficient. There, just past the outbuilding, was activity, a form moving around the back, the identical jacket, the identical man, without a torch, without a sound, merely advancing slowly towards the tool storage as if he had every right to be there. Eli's intuition shrieked. He seized the aged firearm from its mount near the hearth. It was covered in dust but armed. He threw open the rear entrance and strode into the snow, his footwear compressing the surface with a sound like fracturing bones. The man pivoted, their gazes connected for the initial instance. "Final caution," Eli declared, his tone as unyielding as frozen metal. The man merely grinned once more. "Do you genuinely believe their safety here is permanent?" And then he disappeared into the woodland like an apparition. Eli remained in the snow for a considerable time afterward, his heart pounding against his ribcage. He required no further corroboration. They were not merely fleeing mistreatment, they were being pursued. Eli obtained no slumber that evening, not a single moment of repose. The surge of adrenaline had immobilized him, compelling his attention to each gust of the breeze, each groan of the timber, every footfall that might be alien. Luna, too, remained awake. She traversed the floor noiselessly, her claws producing a consistent, cautionary beat. Scout made faint sounds in his slumber, entirely oblivious to the presence awaiting them beyond their delicate sanctuary of hearthlight and shade. Around 3 in the morning, the forest had fallen into complete stillness once more, not a peaceful quiet, but a stillness suggesting that something external had ceased motion, not due to departure, but because it was observing. It was then the noise recurred, not a rap this time, but a metallic clang, subdued, deliberate, originating from the outbuilding. Eli moved with a swiftness that belied his years. He took the torch in one hand, the firearm in the other. Luna emitted a low rumble from deep within her, yet refrained from yelping. She trailed him closely as he cautiously maneuvered through the rear entrance, forcing it ajar with his shoulder. The frigid air assailed his face like biting jaws, but that apprehension dulled all other sensations. The outbuilding was situated 20 feet distant, its form dark against the light-colored snow. One panel of its door was ajar, just a fraction sufficient for entry or exit of whomever had been present. Eli directed the beam of light along the walkway, footprints, recent boot impressions leading directly to the doorway, then vanishing within. No tracks leading away, the intruder, whoever it was, remained inside. Eli called out, his tone incisive and resolute, "Emerge at once, and I will not fire." No response. He advanced a single pace. Luna became rigid, the fur on her back erect, her snarl escalating in tone. Subsequently, the man emerged. The identical jacket, the same composed visage, yet his grin had vanished, supplanted by a more frigid expression. He elevated his hands as if in jest. "Calm down," he stated, merely verifying their continued existence. Eli maintained his aim with the firearm. "For what reason? They possess worth. Let us conclude with that. That young one bears a burn. Would you care to explain the nature of that worth?" The man gestured noncommittally. "The sort for which individuals remunerate." That settled it. Eli's respiration hitched, his vision momentarily obscured. They had marked Scout, transformed him into a possession. He was not a being saved, he was an item, an entry on an inventory. "You shall not take them," Eli declared, his voice raspy. The man advanced a single, deliberate pace. "You are not law enforcement. You reside in an isolated area. No mobile reception. No nearby residents. Should you vanish, no one will investigate." And it was at that instant Luna sprang. Without caution, without reluctance, she surged through the snow, yelping fiercely, colliding with the man's limb with her full mass. He toppled with an exclamation of pain, the weapon concealed beneath his jacket sliding across the frozen surface. Eli propelled it away with his foot, firearm still aimed, his pulse now pounding within him. Luna stood above the man, snarling more intensely, canines exposed, her eyes reflecting the torchlight. Eli advanced swiftly and resolutely, seizing a piece of cord from within the outbuilding. He bound the man's hands posteriorly while Luna maintained vigilance, still rumbling, her form quivering with fury, apprehension, and a more profound emotion, something that had awaited release for months. The man offered no resistance, merely mumbled something inaudibly as Eli pulled him to the foot of a tree near the veranda and secured him to its bole. "They were not intended for survival," he murmured. "They are impaired. That is the reason for their low acquisition cost." Eli gazed at him, revulsion creeping up his back like a viscous fluid. "You are mistaken," he stated softly. "They endured you. That renders them more resilient than you could ever aspire to be." Returning indoors, Scout cried faintly once more, perceiving the alteration in atmosphere. Eli knelt by his side, stroking his delicate form. Luna followed him in and settled around her young one, at last lowering her head. For the initial occasion, Eli comprehended something. Perhaps Luna had not led Scout to him because he was an unfamiliar presence in the forest. Perhaps she had brought him because she sensed it. She perceived an element in Eli, something fractured, yet receptive, prepared to contend, prepared to mend, prepared to remain. The subsequent events altered the entirety of the situation. The initial light of dawn did more than penetrate the darkness, it fractured something within Eli. A heat he had not experienced for many years permeated the dwelling, not from the hearth, but from the gentle resonance of optimism. Scout, though still delicate, his breathing regular, burrowed into Luna's side as if securing himself to existence. Luna, depleted from her nocturnal confrontation, placed her head on Eli's footwear and shut her eyes, at last permitting herself to rely on another for vigilance. Externally, the man, still secured to the tree, had ceased his menacing talk. He now pleaded, initially with derision, then with urgency. Yet Eli remained silent. It was unnecessary, for just as the sun ascended further, a novel sound mingled with the breeze, the distinct compression of tires on snow. Two dark-colored vehicles emerged from the woodland, bearing state and federal emblems, illumination off, quiet yet commanding in their arrival. Eli was positioned on the veranda, firearm lowered, his posture rigid. The principal operative disembarked, Angela Cortez, from the Animal Crimes Unit, a name Eli had not uttered in a long time, but one he had previously held in confidence. She had been a novice during one of his final field operations. Now she was in command of one. "Did you transmit the location data?" she inquired. Eli affirmed. "And the pictures, the marker, the individual?" She looked at the bound person still quaking by the tree, then her gaze returned to Eli. You have just dismantled the final component of one of the most egregious clandestine breeding enterprises across 3 states. Eli did not grin, not immediately, but his posture finally relaxed. Within, the personnel carefully placed Scout into a cushioned transport container. They examined the burn, collected blood specimens, and recorded all details. However, upon attempting to isolate Luna for a medical check, she rumbled a subdued, cautionary noise that caused every seasoned operative to hesitate. She was not being aggressive, she was being protective. She remains with the young one, Eli stated with resolve. They are not damaged, they are recuperating in unison. Angela concurred. In that case, we shall provide care for them collectively. That evening, Eli found himself in a modest lecture hall within the community animal refuge. He desired neither the recording devices nor the public focus, but the refuge staff urged him to recount the events, his account, not the official report, but the personal narrative. He was positioned at the forefront of the space, Luna by his side, Scout slumbering in his embrace, enveloped in a fresh covering someone had contributed, bearing his daughter's name, Ellie, stitched along its border. He cleared his throat. I once preserved lives, or so I believed. Then I endured the loss of my spouse, my young daughter. I perceived the world as silent until this canine appeared, transporting her offspring through blizzard and tempest, not driven by optimism, but by an unwillingness to cease. And in that journey, she provided me with a motive to cease perishing as well. A profound quietness pervaded the chamber, there was hardly an tearless eye present. Eli gazed down at Luna. She had faith in me even when I lacked faith in my own self. And I do not believe her arrival here was fortuitous, I believe she was guided. The recording gained widespread popularity online, a man who rescued a puppy, a mother who rescued a man, and a tiny pulse of life named Scout that united 2 fractured realities. Observations arrived from all corners of the earth, tales of sorrow, recuperation, endurance. Individuals recognized an element in that narrative that resonated with their own experiences, the yearning for bond, the wonder of a renewed opportunity. Several months thereafter, the dwelling presented a changed appearance, not more orderly but clearly inhabited. Luna's resting place was situated near the hearth. Scout had grown to twice his former dimensions, now robust enough to vocalize at rodents and pursue descending foliage. Eli had even repurposed a section of the outbuilding, not for keeping items, but as a modest infirmary where he assisted other stray creatures in regaining their stability. On a particular afternoon, Eli strolled to the boundary of his land, holding a solitary bloom. He knelt at the burial site identified with his daughter's name, carefully laid the blossom on the earth. Nearby, Luna sat erect, Scout pressing against his flank. I believe you dispatched them, he murmured, and I am at last attentive. For, on occasion, the extraordinary does not transpire in an instant. It materializes gradually, through a mother's sorrow, a man's anguish, and a young one's determination to survive.